He is the market whiz known for his contrarian bets and strong political views as well. He has been quoted saying that he gets interested in a sector when there is a problem. Speaking to us today on markets, the economy and of course politics is Shankar Sharma, co-founder and chief global strategist of First Global. Mr. Sharma, thank you for joining us and welcome to Bloomberg Quint.
Thank you, Tamanna.
All right, I'm going to start with the markets first. It has been a rocky few weeks, a rocky patch really for quite some time for Indian markets. What, in your view, are the biggest factors driving this phase? What are the challenges up ahead?
Well, the major factor has been, of course, that there has been a global correction in equities in the last, month or month and a half. So, India has suffered a bit more. But I don't think it's anything very out of character. In a bull market, you will have these occasional situations lasting anything between, from a few days to 2 or 3 months. That doesn't portend any bear market or anything very significant. In my view, it was long overdue. When it happens, we always find some reasons to intellectualize it, like we can say long-term capital gains in India or bond yields spiking up in the U.S. But I think it's just a very normal correction, nothing more than that. So, I've seen plenty of these, which are fairly routine. Yeah, eventually at some point you will get a bear market, as is inevitable in any asset class, but we are not there yet at all.
Okay, I've been reading some of your quotes in interviews, and you often talk about how you prefer small caps to, large caps or even mid caps in terms of returns. Isn't this a very risky proposition, especially when so many people look up to you for advice? Is the risk worth it in the small cap space?
Well, I mean, I don't go out and say that any particular stock should be bought, because it's ultimately if I risk my own capital, presumably I've done my homework. But it's not an easy space to work in, because obviously these companies are have gone through some trouble, some problem. There have been management issues, or they can be outright new companies without much of a track record. So in any of the situations, for an outsider to make a informed decision is very, very hard. It's hard enough for us. It's even harder for somebody who's not engaged full-time into investing. So I do not recommend this as a strategy to be followed by recreational investors. That said, even if you had passively bought a mutual fund which invests only in small caps, you would have done very well for yourself over the last 4 years. I do not see that changing. I think the bull market in small caps is very young. It's very vibrant. These corrections of the kind that you saw when stocks can fall 30%, par for the course. You should be prepared for them. You should be able to live through them. In my view, that is the best space to be in. We go looking for more troubled spaces in the small cap space, but even in the so-called more normal spaces, there is plenty of money to be made. Of course, for a small investor, the best place is obviously a fund. There are very good fund managers out there, and I think while you will not get as much returns as directly buying in the market, I think risk adjusted you will be very, very well off. But in either event, in either strategy, small caps are the place to be in India. I do not think that the large caps are going to give you anything very spectacular. In fact, even if you go back last 4 years, the returns from large caps, in my view, like 12.5% Sensex or Nifty returns, is very tepid relative to the volatility you undergo in equities. Versus that, small caps have given 40% plus compound annual growth in the last 4 years. Though that kind of return attracts me. A 12% return is a nothing return. So you already have a big divide in the large cap and the small cap return universe, and the spectrum of returns. It's very clear where an investor needs to be, and which is the small cap part of the market.
Broadly speaking, any sectors or any specific areas that you're liking right now?
Well, all commodities, chemicals, steel. I like infrastructure, road builders. Again, a lot of these sectors have undergone a lot of shakeout. So in steel, a lot of capacity has gone out because of the debt problems. New capacities are not being funded by financial institutions. So there is a squeeze on additional capacity, while demand is reasonably robust, not great, but not bad either. Same is with chemicals. Capacity was shut down in China. New capacities are being constrained. So existing players are enjoying fairly good product prices. Same thing with infra. You have seen a big bull market in infra till 2007, and the whole sector collapsed under the weight of irrational bidding, irrational project wins. That was like 11 years back. Now the whole sector has shrunk to a handful of companies with reasonable balance sheets, while the scale of business available is pretty good. So earlier there were like 35 companies bidding for a road project. Now there are probably 5 or 6 companies, while the scale of opportunity remains very, very high. So those are the mismatches in sectors which kind of were here very popular. Then because of the popularity, big bubbles built up, they all went down, and now a few players emerge while the scale of the opportunity remains, but just a few players left to exploit it. So all of these sectors like steel or chemicals or infra follow what we are looking for, which is that reasonable market size opportunity, but fewer players today than were 10 years back.
Okay, you've said that you look with more interest at spaces which are going through a bit of trouble. Should one assume that you're interested in public sector banks right now, because there is a whole host of trouble going on over there?
The only exception I make there is in financials, because in financials, unfortunately, the problem is that there are no real assets. In industrials, you know that this plant, this machinery has some value, but in financials, you have a loan book. We don't know what the value or the worth of the loan book is, how much of it is properly provisioned, how much of it is not. And while everybody might think that PSU banks, are a can of worms, we have seen, RBI come down very heavily on some marquee private sector names in the last year or two, saying that your disclosures were very, very bad. And in fact, if properly accounted for, the NPAs would wipe out last maybe a year or 2 years of profit. So while everybody is coming down hard on PSU banks, we have enough examples of the regulator coming down very hard on even some of the storied private sector names. I don't like financials as a space broadly. There are some exceptions here or there, but basically the accounting is very opaque, and it's very hard to make a case for any value. For instance, you can't say whether half book, which is where most PSU banks are trading, is reasonably cheap or reasonably valued, because you don't know what the book is. You don't know what other problem can happen. So that's a troubled spot, yes, but I'm not fishing there.
Okay, no, I brought up PSB banks because so much has been happening. Just yesterday, Governor Patel, the RBI Governor Urjit Patel, has said that we don't have enough regulatory powers because of dual ownership in public sector banks. It sounds like pretty much a cry for help. What is your reading of how this situation has been handled post the PNB fraud has come to light?
I mean, I think the statement, with all due respects, is a bit of a cop-out, because I think the RBI has immense powers. Yes, there is a shareholder, which is the government of India, but the shareholder doesn't, decide on risk management policies and accounting policies and disclosure policies of banks, and that's exactly where the problem lies. The main shareholder decides on appointments. Yes, it decides on some working procedures, but the risk management is where we have seen these failures. That's to be decided by the Reserve Bank of India. So yeah, you can say that there is a dual control, but effectively the risk management part of it is given to the Reserve Bank of India. I'm not saying the RBI is necessarily to blame for every problem. I mean, I'm not making that case. In a big, large, complicated system like banking, worldwide regulators are at a loss. I mean, we've seen that in the US, how a huge subprime scam built up right under the nose of the Federal Reserve, and it exploded and virtually crashed the world economy. So here, PNB, $2.5 billion is really chicken feed. So I'm not saying the RBI is to blame for this, but to say that they don't have powers, I mean, I do not buy that argument.
I want to come to politics now, because it seems to be the big buzz in the markets as well. Every election is watched so keenly by market participants. Do you think in the rest of 2018 and in the run-up to 2019, it's going to be a big factor determining the movement of markets?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you the reason for that. You can only, I like to go only with data rather than, sort of emotions as far as markets are concerned. And the politics of India has never really affected either growth or, for that matter, equity returns. Let's go back to the time that Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, 91, ran a coalition government under Narasimha Rao. We had terrific returns for the first 3 years and were tepid right throughout till the end of 98. But the important thing is, as far as growth was concerned, and by the way, there was an Asian crisis in the middle which kind of muddies the picture for India, which has nothing to do with India, really speaking. But then we had the United Front government. We had, I think, 2 or 3 prime ministers in a matter of 2 years' time. But GDP growth that time, go back and check, was 7.8%, which was the best GDP growth in the entire 90s. So in a period where there was a huge mishmash of parties and there were rapid changes in the leadership, yet India delivered 7.8%. And then you had the UPA government, which was again a coalition. You had the NDA government, which was a coalition. This is the only government since Rajiv Gandhi which is actually a majority. Otherwise, we have had largely coalition governments. But to say that India has not done well or the markets have not done well since Rajiv Gandhi up to the point of 2014 is obviously not supported by data. So yes, politics is intriguing. It occupies a reasonable part of conversations on WhatsApp and Twitter and all that. But beyond that, I pay absolutely no attention to politics to determine where markets are going to go. And again, I do not believe that markets necessarily get driven 6 to 12 months before elections. Look, at the earliest, we are going to see elections end of the year. That's what I hear. Or it could happen at the normal time, which is, summer of 2019. That's a very long period in which the market has to worry about elections. It will worry about it, or it will react to elections, but I think closer like a month or 2 months before the actual polling starts, because that's the time when you have news flow like opinion polls and, pundits coming on television and predicting X victory or Y loss. So I'm not going to stick my neck out and say that politics is going to be the overall driver of equity returns. I think the overall driver of equity returns in India is going to be, number one, the global macro, the global equity market performance, and that's terrific to say the least. I don't see any bear market coming up. And second, India's own macro, which is a tad problematic, but the Indian micro on individual company basis, that looks pretty good. So overall, I'm optimistic about India, not because I see that election results are going to throw up an absolute majority for any party and all that. I have my doubts whether that can happen. The data doesn't support it. Yeah. But even if there is a coalition of any kind, whether this party or that party, I don't see that as being any determinant of what happens to the stock market thereafter. In the last 10 years preceding this government, we saw the market crash 10% when the UPA came to power. And when the same government was re-elected, we saw a 20% up move. So, go and figure that out, why the market was so bearish when these guys came first time and why it was so bullish when they came the second time, despite it still being a coalition.
You're one of the few market participants who is not only very vocal about their opinions on politics, but is also very clearly a Congress supporter. And this is quite a rare commodity in markets where a lot of big market participants clearly favor the current dispensation. Can you explain why you support the Congress party? Is it based on any kind of economic rationale?
I only support good data. I'm not interested because Congress party is not going to give me a Rajya Sabha seat, nor am I interested. Nor do I do any business that depends on the largest from any political party. So, I'm very apolitical as a person. On a philosophy basis, on a philosophical basis, I'm a militantly secular person. That's one. Number two, I'm a slave to data. The data for the UPA government from 2004 to 14 is absolutely stunning and staggering in terms of what they managed to achieve. And again, it's only data. It could be Manmohan Singh, or it could be Chidambaram, or it could be anybody else, who could have been Prime Minister. My view would still remain the same, that 10 years of the data of the UPA government, and remember, they got only 3 good years out of their 10. Because that was 4 to 7. Otherwise, from 8 to 14 remained the most troublesome years that the world has seen in the last 80 years. So you had the Great Recession, and then the aftermath of that. Then you had the taper caper in 2013. You had a huge spike up in oil to 150 in 2008. It had to undergo $100 oil for pretty much its entire 10 years. Despite that, it did the best of, and I challenge this openly, show me one economy that did better than India in the period from 2008 to 14. In 2003 to 2004 to 7, no problem. Several people did well because of rising tide. All economies did well. Of course, India did spectacularly well. We grew 9 or 10%, I think, a couple of years. The fiscal deficit was like 0.7% in 2007. So yeah, that was good data, but in my view, not conclusive data to say how good or bad a government is. My view is based on the performance of the UPA government from 2008 to 2014, when the track was treacherous. It was absolute doomsday for every economy in the world. In that period, to deliver 7.6% CAGR, old series, good data, despite not increasing public debt to GDP. I mean, that calls for a real round of applause. I mean, if I were running the country, if I delivered that data, I'd be a proud man. So please forget the politics of it. Let's just be slaves to data.
Okay.
Show me one country that did better on growth and management of debt. You will not find a single example. That's why, I mean, when I say that, look, they did very well, I mean, people say you're a Congress supporter, but that's not the point. I criticized that government, when they did the Vodafone thing. Okay, I was very vocal. And I criticized the government for not being hard enough or harsh enough on clamping down on gold imports. They did that, but they did that, I think, 2 years too late. They should have been more proactive and should have clamped down on gold imports a lot earlier than they did. So, look, data tells me one thing, but that doesn't mean that I can have only a single view. I've criticized that particular dispensation. Today you can't criticize, that's okay, that's a different sort of era, different environment. But the fact of the matter is that the data or the jury on this government will be out when they complete 5 years. Then we will sit and assess how well they did across all parameters.
I was actually going to come to that, but you've sort of preempted that question. I was going to ask you that with nearly 4 years of data in front of you, do you have an assessment with this government? Because remember the plank on which this government was elected. It was elected at a time when there was a narrative of complete policy paralysis with UPA 2, that it was a corruption-riddled government. No work
which I don't buy. Which was absolute. Which was absolute rubbish. It was a good coinage by certain people, and the media obviously loves these under-analyzed coinages. There was no policy paralysis. The fact of the matter was that government was not allowed to function. It was not allowed to function because of a confluence of events and forces. You had this, a mythical corruption thing invented by a certain gentleman, and then picked up by a certain media house, and then fomented by Jantar Mantar based dharnas, and then every single thing then fell apart because of that one thing that started, I think, 2011 or 12. Then when you push somebody in a corner, and then you're fighting a fire all day long, what policy do you expect from that person? If you push anybody in a corner all day long, that person is supposed to fight a fire, and then you say you're not building the house, and you say, boss, hey, I'm busy fighting this fire. So anyway, I don't buy the term policy paralysis. There was no paralysis. It was an engineered paralysis. It worked. I mean, the government, was voted out.
One way or the other, it worked. My point is that this government has come with the promise of good governance, with bringing the house back in order, with improving India's economy. Do you have any assessment as of today with nearly 4 years of data?
Well, look, this government, I mean, for one, and again, it's not, take away from what they have done. I think, they really, I mean, rather, as a country, the country got lucky with oil prices. I mean, that is a huge dividend we got as a nation. I think my math tells me you got like $50-60 billion of savings every year for at least 3 years. I mean, that's like virtually 6-7% of GDP, almost as a stimulus, if you can call it that. And that, of course, helped. Every single parameter was helped because of oil. That, inflation came down, fiscal deficit came down, current account came down, rates, therefore, came down. And that then set off a cycle of, obviously, markets doing well. And, generally everything turns for the better when you have lower inflation and lower rates. I think the government has done some stuff good, which is obviously the Aadhaar on the DBT side. Whether you can extend it to say that linking of bank accounts is necessarily a good thing or phone is a good thing, I think the Supreme Court is the final arbiter on that. My view is that on the DBT front, if they really go through and do what they are doing, I think that's a huge boon. Some stuff like GST, I mean, I think there's plenty of data out there could have been better done, but it's a big, complicated policy. There can be missteps. But like I said, I don't make conclusions on governments too early in their cycle. I mean, I think 1 year to go, we should then sit and assess what the numbers should look like. In my view, the only thing the government should be careful about is really on the deficit, on the twin deficits, that if oil prices go back up, which in my view they will, do they have a plan B? If they don't, then they need to have one right now, because that is going to be a problematic thing for India. So we enjoyed the good, but we should be prepared for the bad as well.
Do you have any kind of analysis on how the political opposition to the current dispensation is shaping up? It's getting particularly interesting right now with several by-poll results showing that some kind of an opposition unity may work in some pockets. It's still not clear what role the Congress party will play and to what extent. What is your analysis of how this anti-government political front is shaping up in the run-up to 2019?
Well, I mean, if you look at the data for 2014, it was a near perfect outcome for the ruling party. I mean, they won 90% of all seats on offer in 11 states, which constituted 60% of the total seats in India, which means that even without competing any other state, they would have got more than 50% of the seats. Now, that's like it's like a perfect trade. In markets, there are periods in which you have absolute perfection. Whatever you touch turns to gold. That your longs go up and your shorts go down. I mean, that's like, just a purple patch. So that was an absolute purple patch for the government. Just looking at plain data, and like I said, I'm a slave to data, not to any particular, very strong, view either side. If the data contradicts my view, I will change my view. That's the way, I'm trained. The data clearly tells me that to replicate that is a Herculean task, and I'm sure the strategists and the polls and the think tank for the BJP clearly know that it's going to be very, very difficult to replicate that data. And if you find shortfalls coming in, let's say, I hear polls saying that they might get 220 or 230, or after yesterday's numbers, there are numbers floating around which could be like 130 seats less. If UP itself, which was like 73 or 74 seats, goes to even 35 seats, so then you straight away lose 35 there, and then there's Gujarat, and there's Rajasthan, there is MP. I mean, it was like it was like bulldozing the opposition completely. It was just like a 26 love here and 25 love here and 15 love there. It was just an amazing performance. Yeah. So if that falls short, even minorly, then you can see, numbers coming in 50, 100 seats short. Possibly, we don't know. If that were to happen, then the real question is what happens then? Who forms the government with what kind of coalitions? But my view is that it is a situation wherein the opposition has no option but to, find ways to arrange themselves, whether it is under TMC or it's under, what happened in UP. But I think just for their political survival, they will need to figure out a way to, get their act together. And yesterday, I think what happened was, I think SP and the BSP, it was just a nice experiment. They probably just said, hey guys, look, let's try this out. Let's give it a shot. If it works, then we will think of larger things. And it worked for them.
It worked in that pocket. But the thing about sometimes elections and politics is, and all parties now have these legions of data crunchers, but the party with the big idea and the ability to strike an emotional chord sometimes goes much further. Is that big idea still unclear from the non-BJP side of this match? It's not crystallized around what they stand for and what that alternative narrative is.
Well, I mean, by that token, I'm not even sure what narrative is there with the with the party in power or the parties in power, if you call it a coalition. So, because the old narrative is clearly, has not been talked about in recent elections, it's kind of gone away to some other aspects which are not necessarily the planks on which, people voted. So, narratives change, and remember one more thing, that in 2003 or 2004, it was a situation wherein on the other side there was no narrative, there was no leadership. And yet the NDA most unexpectedly lost. I'm not saying that the same thing will happen. All I'm saying is stock markets, elections, movies, usually consensus is wrong. So I'm very, very reticent to think consensus wherever human emotions are concerned. And all these things are only emotional, in markets are totally emotional, politics is emotional, movies are emotional. So you never know, because sometimes there doesn't need to be a narrative on the other side. Sometimes that I don't like your narrative, and hence I will take any other narrative. I mean, that's one possibility. Or sometimes you can go back and say, I still like it because there's nobody on the other side giving me anything which is reasonable in terms of narrative. So mapping that is not my job. That's not what I get paid to do. But to say that just because there is no narrative on the other side, results can't be on the other side, that I think will be a little premature to make that call.
All right. One last question, Shankar Sharma. Your 6 months to a year's outlook for Indian markets and the Indian economy.
No, I'm bullish. I mean, I said that in the beginning, that I think there's a big global tailwind for equities, and India is looking good. I mean, we have, like I said, we have a few, macro challenges. I hope the government has a plan to deal with them. But Indian micro looks good. Indian earnings, I think, will be okay. So by and large, India looks okay. I mean, I don't think we are going to have a blowout Sensex performance. I think we'll tread the water. But small caps look absolutely rocking, and that's a place to be in.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and speaking with us on Bloomberg Quint.
Thank you, Tamanna.
Life's so lovely, live life happily. Oh, plan your life the way you want it to be.
LIC's new endowment plan offers a combination of protection and savings.
Invest to save and get insurance. Bring home eternal happiness.
Sir, please believe me, I am in this business for the last 12 years. Okay, I'll wait for your call. Thank you so much.
They still don't know you after all these years?
क्या करें? पहचान ही नहीं है.
Simple solution hai. List on the stock exchange. With listing comes recognition. Investors get interested in you. And funding happens.
Come on, yaar. I'm not big enough to list. Chal, let's leave.
There's a stock exchange exclusively for your kind of company. NSE Merge. It's the right platform for your business.
Really?
Yeah.
My kind of company?
Exactly. Get listed, get recognized. अरे भाई, हीरे की असली परख जौहरी को ही तो होती है. चल.
NSE Merge. साथ हमारा, सफलता आपकी. The SME Growth Platform from India's largest stock exchange.
On 26 November 1949, the Constitution of India was adopted, recognizing liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life, which cannot be separated from each other. The government of Karnataka has imbibed the ethos of the Constitution by developing programs and policies aimed at creating a socially, economically, and politically just society. Karnataka's flagship programs such as Maitri, Annabhagya, and Arivu have created an equal opportunity platform for all, irrespective of their gender, economic, or social status. Karnataka is committed to encourage education through various welfare initiatives, ensuring equal status for women and empowering minorities to uphold every individual's dignity. In the last 4 years, Karnataka has formed 462 new Gram Panchayats, which has taken the principles of democracy to the grassroots levels, and our Progressive Vision 2025 document engages public government participation to build a better state for all. Karnataka's collective vision to endorse fraternity, justice, and equality has transformed into Karnataka's model of development, which is based on the tenets of the Constitution.
White shirts, कितने plain और simple. Fog scent, plain और simple white shirt को बना दे special और fashionable. Fog scent, new fashion wear for men.